I'm being asked to solve this quadratic equation here using a completing the square method. So to do this, I complete the square in my usual way. And I get x minus 2 squared minus 16 is equal to 0. Now I want to solve this. The first thing I'm going to do is add 16 to both sides. So I get x minus 2 squared equals 16. Now I want to square root both sides. Square rooting x minus 2 squared gives me x minus 2. And square rooting 16 gives me plus or minus the square root of 16. I'll explain about this in a moment. So I have x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 16, which is 4. Now let's just look at this plus and minus for a moment. If I square plus 4, I get 16. If I square minus 4, I also get 16, and that's why we have to make sure to write this, because we're actually getting two answers here, one positive and one negative. Now to finish solving, I'm going to add 2 to both sides, so I get x equals 2 plus or minus 4. This tells me that x is 2 plus 4, which is 6, or 2 minus 4, which is minus 2. Notice that because I was solving a quadratic, I was expecting two answers, and I got two answers. Remember, we get the two answers because of the plus and the minus at this stage here, so don't miss this part out. Here's one for you to try. Press pause and have a go. When you're ready for the answers, press play. You should have started like this. Now I need to square root both sides. I get x minus 6 on this side, and on this side, don't forget, it's plus or minus the square root of 9. So I've got x minus 6 equals plus or minus the square root of 9, which is 3. Now I get x equals 6 plus or minus 3, and this gives me my two answers, 6 plus 3, which is 9, and 6 minus 3, which is 3. Now this question asks me to give my answers correct to 2 decimal places. I'd be allowed a calculator for this question, and actually it's not any more difficult. I start by completing the square on this equation. Completing the square gets me to this point. I now need to add 19 to both sides, so I get x plus 3 squared equals 19. Now I want to square root both sides. This gives me x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 19. Now the square root of 19 is not something I know, so I'm going to use my calculator for this bit when I get to it. First of all though, I've got to take 3 away from both sides, so I get x equals minus 3 plus or minus the square root of 19. I can now use my calculator to get the two answers. To get the first answer, I type in minus 3 plus root 19, and to 2 decimal places I get 1.36. And for the second answer, I type in minus 3 minus root 19, and I get minus 7.36 to 2 decimal places. These are my two final answers. Here's one of those for you to try. Remember, you can use a calculator for this. Press pause and have a go. When you're ready, press play. Here are the answers. Now in this question, I'm being asked to leave my answers in exact form. This would be on a non-calculator paper. Believe it or not, it's actually slightly easier than with a calculator. We start in our normal way by completing the square. I then add 6 to both sides to get x plus 1 squared equals 6, and then square root both sides to get x plus 1 equals plus or minus root 6. At this stage now, I need to take away 1 from both sides, so I get x equals minus 1 plus or minus root 6. And I actually stop here because I have my two answers in exact form here, -1 plus root 6 and -1 minus root 6. Here's one of those for you to try. Press pause and have a go. When you're ready for the answers, press play. Here's what you should have got for this one. Now this is the hardest question of this type that you can get. The difficulty here is that you've got a coefficient of x squared that isn't 1, so remember you need to complete the square very carefully with this coefficient in mind. Press pause and have a go. When you're ready, press play. The completing the square step for this one looks like this. From this point here, I then need to add 5 to both sides, so I get 2x minus 1 squared equals 5. Now I need to divide both sides by 2, so I get x minus 1 squared equals 5 over 2. Now I want to square root both sides. This gives me x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 5 over 2. Now I want to add 1 to both sides, so I get x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 over 2. This is my answer in exact form, so I stop here. Here's another one of those for you to try. This time you can use a calculator and give your answers correct to 2 decimal places. Press pause and have a go. When you're ready, press play. Here are the answers that you should have got for this one.